We do have a ton to get through in this episode.
Common sense is finally prevailing.
There was controversy this month, Dave.
I'm not particularly excited by that.
Secrets and things on set.
I haven't told them anything.
I think this is just good times all round.
Every Doctor Who is liked by somebody, and that's a really good thing.
Davo, my doctor.
I know we disagree on this one.
First world problems, Dave.
I get why fans are asking those questions.
Oh gosh, that's actually quite a lot to talk about.
It doesn't compute.
It's the elephant in the room.
That's okay.
Fandom versus the BBC.
The cardinal sin.
Moving along.
Lunch.
G'day, I'm Rob.
And I'm Dave.
And you're listening to the Doctor Who show for the month of May 2025, where tonight we'll be pulling a 180 from all the new series hot takes we've been making of late. We're going to go back to 1970 to talk about the Jon Pertwee classic, The Ambassadors of Death. Dave, this was one of your two picks when we put the poll out.
It was. We said we were going to nominate forgotten or less remembered stories, and I think Ambassadors of Death is definitely overshadowed by its fellows at the start of the Pertwee era, so I'm really glad we're talking about that. I think it's worth noting, Rob, that because of production schedules and time and the like, we are recording this before episode 7 goes out.
Mm-hmm.
So if something happened like the Rani tri-generated into Tom Holland or something, and everybody's flabbergasted, we're not even giving it a cursory mention, that's why we are watching this having seen episode 6 but not 7, even though we will have discussed episode 7 by the time you hear this. Ambassador of Death, 31% in the poll, Rob?
Yes, and your second pick got second, Mysterious Planet on 23.6.
Yes, with your picks, Castrovalva at 27.8 and Mindwarp at 18.1, although that does mean that had the trial stories not completely by accident, we had no idea each of us was going to pick a segment of trial, had they not split the vote, they would have actually won. So I think we've decided that at some point during the year we will do an episode dedicated to... Now, is it a story deep dive? Is it a season deep dive? Is it both?
Yeah, I think it's both, really.
It's both. So, look, we will do trial at some point. We're due to do some Colin. Colin deserves some love.
Yeah, and as I said to a listener, actually, who said, oh, you should do the Colin era, I said, well, we've actually done his first season before as a season deep dive, so it only feels right to do this as a season deep dive.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And we, of course, did the Twin Dilemma as a Gin and TARDIS, what, about a year ago now?
Yeah, time flies.
Time does fly. Speaking of time flying, Rob?
Yes?
Do we have any news?
Well, funnily enough, not a lot of news, Dave, with the new season happening and, you know, people talking about ratings and all that sort of malarkey. But an interesting piece did pop up in the Mirror by our old friend Nicola Methven. This is the same writer who has broke Doctor Who news in the past. And there's always a particular kind of Doctor Who fan who's like, oh no, that can't be true. Don't trust newspapers. The newspapers always get Doctor Who rumours wrong. Yet from where I'm sitting, Dave, I think the big rumours in the papers have been pretty much more right than wrong over the last few years. And Methven, in particular, has a good track record. It's funny, but I never see these fans get on the social 6 months later, 12 months later, when said news actually comes true, and say, hey, mea culpa, I was wrong to dismiss the reports, even though I had no contrary evidence. They never do that, Dave. Isn't that mysterious? Anyway, all of this is preamble to Methven writing up, I think what feels like the Doctor Who production office has been out there quietly dropping into the news that it's already planned the next 2 seasons, regardless of what Disney decides to do, and there are near-finished scripts for all of Season 3 and some stories for Season 4 already worked out.
Yeah, this is just another in a long line of articles which all say that Doctor Who will come back. All of them seem to say, but not very quickly. And none of them seem to say, and we're really looking forward to another year with Ncuti Gatwa.
Yes, that's the elephant in the room. But what I found quite interesting too is tucked away in this report by Nicola Methven was this bit that claims a huge chunk of the extra Disney budget, possibly up to £10 million per episode, count them, £10 million per episode, is spent on improving the picture quality to get it up to 4K, because Disney goes out in 4K, whereas the BBC on iPlayer only uses 2K. So it actually costs a lot less because they don't have to do all this processing on the picture. I found that extraordinary, Dave.
Yeah, it's a huge amount of money for a technical thing I don't really understand. I mean, I obviously know that 4K is better than 3K or 2K or whatever it is that the BBC goes out there. Like, I know that it's a very high resolution and all the rest of it. I'm being a little bit, silly for comic effect, or not, as the case may be. But I mean, I don't really understand what that means. It just baffles me that it's that expensive. But it is, I think, a very good example of something that we have mentioned many times in these news reports, that there are a whole bunch of background things that we just don't see, we don't appreciate, that don't get captured by rumours or news reports of this like. And it is things like where the budget's going on purely technical stuff that those of us raised on the days of, 525 lines go, well, what's that mean?
Yeah, I think part of it is to do with the special effects and stuff, because they've got to make them so much better and sharper to work in 4K and not look really crap. Finally, I will also note the story also suggested that because there could be this gap between now and when we see new episodes, probably this time in 2027, the war between the land and the sea will be held over to 2026, so that there's some Doctor Who next year. And I thought that's an interesting idea, because I'm not sure how that would work in practice, especially if Disney doesn't want to continue with Doctor Who. It wouldn't care about doing something nice to smooth out the experience for fans, would it? I don't know how that would work. I mean, does the BBC still dictate when it's going to show Doctor Who and Disney has to play ball with that? Maybe it does mean that. I don't know. But yeah, the report also said War Between the Land and the Sea will be our 2026 series of Doctor Who, basically.
Yeah, that doesn't entirely shock me, because we haven't had a lot of build-up to it. Although I would not be shocked if at the end of episode 8 of this season there was some sort of these characters will return in the big debut of the War Between the Land and the Sea, and that's when they start to turn up the wick on publicity for that. But then if you're going to start turning up the wick and teasing it in end of May, start of June 2025, that's 7 months before you even get to January 2026.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, me either. Anyway, that was Nicola Methven in The Mirror.
Yes, just continuing with our ongoing series of none of us know what's going on.
But it's fun to talk about.
And yes, as I said, look, it could be that Shooty's very excited about the next series of Doctor Who, but as I said last month, I'm mentally preparing my 16 for 16 list, so...
I think that's wise.
Yes, a little bit of news from me. We like to keep track of the Target books that are coming out. And Rob, there are not one but two sets of Target books now scheduled to come out over the next few months.
Oh, really? Two?
Two, I have discovered. So, coming on the 10th of July, we have a set of 4 new Target books, all from the Gatwa era. We have Lux by James Goss, which I think will be a very cool book.
He's a good writer.
I think he's well suited to that material. The Robot Revolution by Una McCormack.
Yeah, okay.
The Well by Gareth Powell.
Yeah, okay.
And Empire of Death by Scott Hancock.
Ah, interesting. Bit of a dog of an episode, but yeah.
Was that a pun, Rob?
It might have been, Dave.
And then coming on the 29th of January, we now know there are going to be 3 more Targets coming. One by Matt Jones, one by Kenny Colgan, and one by Joseph Lidster. All the speculation is that Matt Jones will be novelising his wonderful 2-part of The Satan Pit.
That makes sense.
That makes sense, but it's unconfirmed. Maybe he's doing another Shooty Gatwa story. Joseph Lister obviously has written a lot of background Doctor Who stuff. He's written some Big Finish. So, yeah, interesting to see what they pick up. But it's good to see that whatever's going on with the series, the Target range and these novelisations are continuing to come out.
Yeah, I've got to say, I'm not collecting them, but I am delighted that they're coming out and that there is still a Target tradition for not just old crusty fans who bought them originally to continue their collections, basically, but for newer people to experience what it's like to buy a novelised version of something they've seen on telly and maybe delve into it a little deeper or whatever. It's still not quite the same. And I'll make a point about that when we talk about Ambassadors of Death later, but I'll just say, yeah, it's great to have this Target tradition continue. I'm just glad to see Matt Jones back in the mix, yeah. Shall we move on to short topics?
Yeah. Now, what have you got for us, Rob? TBC, it says on my running sheet.
Yes, because I hadn't quite thought about it when I sent that out. But, Dave, I'm going to use my short topic this month to give a special shout out to our UK listeners. Now, we have listeners all over the world. Some of you are in what seem like utterly crazy places to me, like how on earth do you know about Dave and I rabbiting on about Doctor Who over in your country? It's so cool. But our UK listeners, guys, wow. During this recent run of hot takes, we've done really great numbers. We always get higher numbers during a new season of the show, as you'd probably expect, because we have all our regular listeners and a whole bunch of new people join in just to hear about the new stuff.
And there's a sense of urgency to listen to a hot take. I get that.
Yeah, there really is. But there was 1 week just recently where we hit number 5 on the Apple Podcasts UK Top TV Reviews podcast chart. And it really wasn't lost on me, as I said at the time, that 3 of the 4 podcasts ahead of us were backed by the pop star Mandy Moore, Empire Magazine, and National Public Radio in the USA. And I sit here and think, yeah, they're pretty heavy hitters. And then there was you and me in the list, Dave. We're just 2 guys with some microphones who do this for fun. We don't monetize it, and yet we're shoulder to shoulder with these other bloody podcasts. There's part of me that thinks it's quite ridiculous, which is why there's kind of a laugh in my voice as I'm saying this. But there's part of me that's really, truly chuffed to bits. So thank you to our UK listeners for turning up and making that happen. It's incredible. And of course, thank you to everyone who listens to us. We see the stats. There are some countries where my sense is that it might only be you and a handful of other people in your whole country who listen to us, because the numbers are so low in certain countries. But we know you're there too. Please, always feel free to drop us an email sometime to let us know about yourself and how you found the podcast and all of that stuff. That's my short topic for the month, Dave.
That's really quite wonderful, Rob. I didn't know you were going to go down that path. And yeah, it's good to thank the listeners, because they do stick around. They do come on board, particularly for the hot takes. We're sometimes just rabbiting on with no idea of what the received fan wisdom or the common views are going to be. And
we have no idea.
We have no idea, and sometimes we find ourselves very in line, and sometimes we get a very large number of bits of feedback that go, look, I didn't agree with you this time. So that's always quite fun. But yeah, when you see stats like that, it's actually quite hard to process.
Yeah, it is. I mean, pop star Mandy Moore, how many fans does she have in the world? Yet there we are, rubbing shoulders with her.
I've never heard of her, so I'm not one of them.
Oh, okay then. Okay.
But you obviously have, so it's a big deal. But no, thank you to our listeners.
Yeah, thank you so much.
One short topic from me. Last month I spoke about watching Earthshock for reasons I'm not quite sure about. And since I had the season 19 box set out, I thought, you know what, I haven't watched The Visitation for a while. So I went and watched The Visitation again, and I really enjoy that story. Look, I'm not going to say that it's a Davison classic, although it is one of his better stories, but it is just a really good, enjoyable Doctor Who story to watch. It looks good. It's got a cool monster. It's got that really sort of thrilling bit of history that, as a kid particularly, the whole, like, the Doctor caused the Great Fire of London. Well, like, that's really, really cool. Yeah. I think you can feel Davison starting to get really into the role in that stage. John Savidan's there, or for 2 scenes only, but who cares? It's just a really fun story to watch.
Yeah, it really is. And I think the location work really helps there. It's fun. I agree it's not a Davison classic, but a lot of people do really like it when you go and mention it online sometime. People come out of the woodwork all over and are like, oh yeah, that's bloody great.
Yeah, and then look, I kept going with season 19 because I thought I haven't watched Kinder in a bloody long time.
Yes.
It's time to rewatch Kinder, and I watched it 1 episode at a time over sort of about 7 or 8 nights. Just, when I had a free half hour before bed and I wasn't feeling exhausted, and I thought, I'm going to watch another episode of Kinder. And it really is spectacularly good, isn't it, Rob?
I think, as I said to you on X, maybe, Dave, there is a reason I name drop it a lot on the podcast. It's a good story.
Yeah, it's surprising just how long it must have been since I've watched it. But, I mean, more than anything, the cast is just phenomenal. It is a really, really good cast. And especially, I've got to say, I just love Simon Rouse as Hindle.
Yeah.
Just an incredible, mad performance. I think it's got 3 absolute belter cliffhangers, like just absolute screamer cliffhangers, really, really good ones. It gets Doctor Who. All the stuff inside Tegan's mind that as a kid I was just like, what's all this? I now watch and go, this is really clever and really quite chilling in some ways. The only thing is, as an adult, you absolutely do see the cheap studio floor.
Yeah.
That is a shame. I think they have done outdoor locations better. But I've got to say, as I watched those 3 season 19 stories, I did appreciate how good it is. But particularly, I do not think it is a coincidence that the 2 best stories of that season, Kinder and Earthshock in my view, were both directed by Peter Grimwade, who I've always said is my absolute clear number 2 director for Classic Who. And he takes 2 stories and just makes them absolute belters. And particularly watching Kinder, you really feel him doing some very clever and careful stuff with the shots. The way he builds things up is really, really effective. And with Earthshock, I mean, we all know the stories about just how many scenes there were. Like, that was action movie pace being done in a TV studio with sort of 4 cameras, and just, amazing work. I think Peter Grimwade is, frankly, not, I don't think, recognised enough for just being a really, really good director. As I say, number 2 on my list.
That's fair. I'll say 2 things. First of all, sounds like you're coming around on season 19, Dave. But more seriously, can you believe this is like children's television of the early 80s? It's similar to me to something like Warrior's Gate, not because they're similar stories, but just conceptually, it's just throwing something out there that you just can't conceive. This was for kids back in the day, not because it's violent or anything per se, but because of the themes and such. You think, God, they were making this for kids, alongside other stories in the same season that might not be as anywhere near as deep.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that, Rob. Actually, just this past weekend, I was over at my sister's place for my mum's birthday, and for some reason we started talking about, the movies of our childhood that they would never let their kids watch now. Stuff like The Never-Ending Story, The Last Unicorn, Return to Oz, just this run of sort of movies that you just go, things were different back then.
Yeah, they really were.
Yeah. But no, it was fun. I've enjoyed watching some Davo.
Shall we move on to our main topic?
Yes.
Well, folks, we've given you the stats. Ambassadors of Death won our recent poll. You all want to hear about it. Well, at least 31% of you want to hear about it, that is. And Dave, we often start these chats with our memories of a classic story or our background with it. So do you want to kick us off with your memories and background of Ambassadors of Death?
Well, Rob, I can tell you the first time I would have seen Ambassadors of Death, because I had a look on the Broadcast Who website, and this was first shown in my lifetime in Australia in March of 1986. So that would have been that big famous 86 repeat run that started with a couple of season 6s and then worked through most, if not all, of the Pertwee era, and then a whole bunch of Tom Bakers as well, and that sort of set up that continuing run of regular repeats across the late part of the 80s for us here in Australia. Of course, that would have been in black and white.
Yes.
We did have an off-air copy of most of it in black and white. It was a very long time before we got this on video, and certainly on DVD. My memory of it as a kid is that I found it very interesting, but I didn't find it particularly exciting. We'll talk about how my view has potentially aged as I have aged. It wasn't a story that I disliked, but it was one that didn't necessarily grab me as much as something like Silurian's Inferno and certainly Spearhead from Space and Terror of the Autons sort of either side of it.
Yeah. It's interesting. I've been racking my brain because I knew this question was coming up, and it's tricky. I don't think I'd seen it by the time I read the Target novel. And the Target novel came out, I had to look that up, in October of 87. So I would have read that by the end of 87, early 88, because I used to buy the Target novels, the new releases at Galaxy Bookshop very early.
And then that was one of the very last Pertwees to come out, wasn't it?
It would have been, yes.
If not the last. I'm not sure what would have been later.
Yeah, I'd have to look that up. So my first experience was likely reading the Target, which, as I've said before today, and as I was alluding to earlier in the chat, is, I think, generally the superior experience to watching any classic story, because you're just pouring the pure distilled story into your brain. There's no weird acting, there's no dodgy sets, there's no bad effects, there's nothing to take your mind off it, there's just the story. So My first time with Ambassadors, I'm going to say, was really bloody good because it was in novel format. Then I probably would have seen it on a VHS dub in Clubland because, I mean, I saw The Demons that way. Mark Douglas did me a lovely dub of The Demons in black and white, so I'm sure Ambassadors was floating around at the same time too.
And probably recorded from that 1986 run.
It would have been. Absolutely it would have been. And then probably I didn't see it again until the mid-90s when it was on UK TV on Foxtel. I probably caught it around then. And then it gets a bit weird because the official VHS release came out in 2002.
Gosh, was it that late?
Yeah, which is like 5 years after DVD started becoming a thing. Not Doctor Who DVDs per se, but just DVD in general. I thought VHS was passé by 2002. And then it was about 2012, maybe 2011, before the DVD came out, which was when I would have seen it again and really watched it with an adult eye and really appreciated it properly. So I've got this strange checkered history with it. But yeah, I thought it was interesting to mention the VHS release came out so late. I guess because they didn't have colour episodes, so they sort of just kept pushing it back and back and back.
Yeah, it was one of the black and white Pertwees that had to be recoloured, but it wasn't like Terror of the Autons and the Demons and even the Silurians, one of the ones that was done in the early 90s, and 92, 93, 94, around that period. So, and I think because the colour copies either didn't exist or the quality wasn't correct or something. I think it might have been American recordings. Does that sound right?
I think Ian Levine is involved somewhere, possibly bringing over American recordings in colour.
Yeah, but the point being it was a much harder colour conversion than some of the other Pertwees. And so,
yes.
Yeah, it's strange to think now that we only had it for half my life in black and white. But it also does feel a bit weird that it has been for the other half of my life in colour, because I still think of this more than almost anything other than probably Mind of Evil. I still think of this as being a black and white story. But then, now I'm pushing the memory here, the VHS was only partially colourised, wasn't it?
Yes, that's correct.
It kept going between black and white and colour, that's right. Yeah. So yeah, it probably does still exist in my memory in many ways as a black and white story. And in some ways that worked. But I actually think this is one of the ones that it was to its detriment to be in black and white, because this is a Bond-esque action-adventure space opera. And I think that it does benefit from being in colour.
Yeah, whereas many times I've talked about that VHS dub of The Demons in black and white and said how that actually enhanced The Demons, and I think of The Demons in black and white, and it's more spooky when it's in black and white. You know, so that's the other side of the coin. But
the Mind of Evil as well, I think that just works so well in black and white.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Whereas Terror of the Autons, that has to be in colour. Like, that's in colour. That's great.
Yeah, exactly right. Dave, let's get into an overview of this for our listeners so they have a bit of a feel for our 30,000-foot view of it all. What's your overview of the story?
Look, it's no secret that I really enjoy Season 7 of Doctor Who. It is my favourite season. I think that there are 3 10 out of 10s in that season. Spearhead, Silurians and Inferno, I think, are genuinely classic episodes of Doctor Who. Is this the weakest one of that season? Look, yes, it is. I'm not going to say that it's as good as Spearhead or Silurians or Inferno, but it's very, very close. It is a very good story. I think that 7 episodes always works in Doctor Who. I think every 7-parter is actually really, really good. Evil of the Daleks is great. Marco Polo's a favourite of mine. And all these ones, because it actually forces the writers to add something else to the script. You can't just take a 4-parter and stretch it out by a couple of episodes like they did with a few of the Pertwee 6-parters. You have to add more. That works here. I think that in this one, you are seeing very quickly that famous anecdote, that famous discussion that Terence Dix had with Malcolm Hulke, where he said, you know, they've given us this thing where we're stuck on Earth, and Malcolm Hulke said, well, you've only got 2 stories, alien invasion or mad scientist, and Terence Dix is like, right, I'm going to defy them. I'm going to prove that's not the case. So, okay, Spearhead from space, yep, that's an alien invasion. But then they're like, okay, how about the aliens were here before us? And Inferno's, how about we do a parallel universe? And although it is a mad scientist story. And in this one, it's like, well, let's do an alien invasion, but not. You know, let's see if we can twist that formula already. And I think you can see the benefit of that almost sort of panicked desperation to be inspired to do something different here. The final thing I'll say is I don't think it holds its length quite as well as its two neighbours do. Watching it this time around, I did only watch one episode at a time, again over about 10 or 11 nights. There were a couple of episodes, episode 6 particularly, where you go, that was a lot of exposition and explaining, but not a lot of action.
Yeah.
But then there'll be other episodes where you go, I can't believe they just packed so much into 25 episodes. So there is 7 parts within there, but I don't think it's quite as uniformly spread as the others, which is probably why it doesn't quite work quite as well, but I'm a big fan. I've gushed there, Rob. How about you?
Well, just to rewind very briefly to Mac Hulk, of course, I'm sure we'll get into the chat that this is actually really by Mac Hulk, even though David Whittaker's name is on the label. I think this one's an underrated Pertwee story for sure. I agree. It's got some super iconic cliffhangers. The aliens in the astronaut suits are really unsettling.
Yeah.
Plus, I think modern viewers coming to this would appreciate its ambition and its atmosphere, because I know I do, especially compared to some of the more straightforward monster stories of the classic era. I'm not talking specifically season 7 here, but just in general. This is trying to do something quite interesting, even if it does take the 7 episodes to get there, which you've begun to talk about, and I'm sure we'll tease out even further.
Yeah, a couple of things you did mention there that I think it's worth picking up. First of all, the cliffhangers are really, really good, and it's I think, illegal to talk about the Ambassadors of Death for more than 5 minutes without mentioning the introduction of the Sting, which they were used to great effect here. And I want to talk more about that in a moment. But also, the ambition is really, really effective. And it's another advantage that you have when you do one story over 7 parts. And this is where Barry Letts really sort of clued on to the advantages of the longer stories. You can amortize the cost of a lot of things over 7 episodes. So suddenly the Space Center feels like an actual Space Center. It feels big and vast, and they've got the time to use it. You can get model work paid for over 7 episodes. You've got a bit more location filming to work with. And when the cast is actually still quite small, again, you can save some money there. So Barry Letts, although it's only his second proper story as producer, you can see the dividends coming there. And in fact, you can see the balance between Terrence Dix, and Terrence Dix has spoken about this, him looking at these scripts and going, right, how can I save them some money? You know, let's cut this and let's cut that. And then the director, Barry Letts, going, we've got 7 parts worth of budget to spend here. Put the helicopter back, you know.
Yeah.
So you know, that is something that works really, really well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that Space Center set, it even has, like, obviously not a working lift, but they've mocked up something to be like a lift, and the Doctor comes up in the lift.
Yes.
And that's that great scene where he's shouting down to someone, why don't I have a pass? Because I don't believe in them.
and even stuff that now looks a little bit funny, like the CSO video screens and everything. As a kid, watching that and going, they have video phones. How cool's that? And it just adds to this Pertwee era sense of we are in the not too distant future, but we are in the future. We have space programs and video phones and all of this cool stuff.
Yeah. So look, to pull the Band-Aid off, episode 1, we're already off to a cracking start there. You know, there's the mystery of what's happened to these astronauts. There's this space theme in general, which was obviously in the news of the day, as well as appearing on the TV screens in Doctor Who. What's going on when those pods dock? The Doctor, he's in fine form. Unit gets to have a big shootout, and Taltalian pulls a gun on the Doctor at the end of the first episode. I mean, wow, that's episode 1, Dave.
Yeah, somebody really knew how to make exciting television right from the start, because, you know, talking about the introduction of the Sting and the experiment they do here where they split the opening credits up, which is the only time they do it, but it works really, really well. But that line in the opening teaser, something took off from Mars. Whee! Like, you know, that's just a perfect, it's a perfect thing to get you going, okay, we're doing right. Like, it's just so well done. And you're right, you pack into that very quickly a sense of an international adventure, and just little things like Liz Shaw calling up France. It's something like the shots of Parkes Radio Telescope in New South Wales, Australia, which many Australians have been to. You been to it, Rob?
Yes.
Yes, I think many Australians have driven past it on a road trip between Melbourne and Sydney at some point in their lives. It's quite famous.
Yeah, it is.
You know, but that gives this sense of this is an international event, in the same way that in the Silurians, the Brigadier's calling France, they're talking about worldwide issues like that, and that's before you even get to a proper action scene.
Yeah, and this is all part of the Pertwee era getting out of the blocks a completely different beast to what Doctor Who had been. When you think of later Pertwee stories, they start to blend in with maybe what came before and what came afterwards. But the early Pertwee stuff, his first and second seasons like this, there's so much new stuff happening and it's so different, and it's always a fun time to go back to.
Yeah, and we know that Barry Letts was very much an internationalist. He wanted to make UNIT feel like a proper international cooperative organisation. So this idea that we can ring America and go, hey, can you help us out? And that they're talking to China. And, it's setting up something that, you're right, does permeate through most of Letts' time as producer. Although I think here you see that energy of doing it for the second time, as opposed to you sort of get into later seasons and it's perhaps not quite got the same energy.
But at the same time, there are things to criticise. Before we get all gushing on the episode or the story here, if this was a modern episode, Dave, we're doing a hot take, I think we'd be pulling up some of the clunky exposition, even in episode 1. Especially as Van Leyden is approaching Mars Probe 7. He has a conversation with the Space Center about precisely why he's there. I mean, he knows why he's there. He would have known why he was going to be there before he blasted off. He doesn't need to be discussing it minutes before he docks. Obviously, it's there to inform the audience, like all expositions, but it's just clunky. And my God, the music when they're docking. It's like an instrumental off Blur's Parklife album, Dave. I made a note here. It doesn't suit a space scene at all. It's meant to be very tense. I mean, docking a craft like that is no picnic. And they're docking with what could be a tomb, basically, with some dead astronauts in it. But we've got this really jolly instrumental while that's happening. These are things I would pull it up on if I was doing a hot take.
Interesting. Look, I agree with you that there is some occasionally clunky dialogue. It's not as bad as, say, the Chibnall era, but you're right, and there are some really funny moments. I think Titanium almost has a proper, like, as you well know, you will use this to do the following plan. Which, you're right. Look, you've got to get it in there. It's not as good as it could have been, and perhaps reflective of the fact that this did go through several drafts with different writers to make it fit for the screen. I disagree with you a bit about the music. Only partially, though. Let me say, you're right. If they presented that in something in 2025 and we were doing it for a hot take, yes, I would say it was a very strange choice. And I guess it is, but I do see it as very reflective of the view that people had of space and space travel in 1970. I mean, this is only a few months after man's landed on the moon. So we do have that real sense of things take time, and you've got a dock, and they've only got an exact amount of fuel for a perfect amount of manoeuvring, which helps with the tension later. But I think it is that very 2001 moon landing sort of classical romance approach to space, if you like, which I agree it feels odd now, but I forgive it because I see where it's coming from.
Oh, yeah. Look, my criticisms are few, all the same. I think it's a really strong first episode. You want to know more. You're itching to know more. And you get into that second episode, you see Sir James meeting with Taltalian, and you think, oh, geez, there's a problem here, and it goes right to the top. And suddenly the tension is amplified even more, again, only in the second episode.
Yeah, and it was really interesting. I was watching it this time, trying to put myself in the mind of a first-time viewer, because I know who General Carrington is and what his motivation is going to end up being and how involved he is. You know that he's doing something a bit dodgy from the start, because he's there when UNIT raids the warehouse. But are we meant to, as an audience, buy his cover story for a little while? Or are we meant to go, well, that's the truth, but not all of the truth? I think that's quite interesting, because this is the problem with watching it for the 40 millionth time. We can never quite put ourselves in the mind of watching it for the first time and not knowing who the baddie is in a conspiracy.
Yeah, but even, I mean, we're jumping ahead a bit to episode 3, when Sir James calls in General Carrington to come clean. He's been pushed by the Doctor and the brig to sort of come clean. He's like, okay, I'll get the guy in. General Carrington comes in. And because Carrington's a military man, and because he's a former astronaut, and you get the sense he's a bit of a hero, you feel he's being straight with the brig about what's going on. And you know he's still up to something, though, and it just really intensifies the plot. I love it. I really do love that.
Yeah, and it's funny, as the Pertwee era and certainly the Pertwee-Tom Baker era goes on, we do start to get the trope of the bad general in the way that I think Star Trek The Next Generation was famous for their bad admirals, bad admirals that would come out and do something dodgy all the way through. But this is the first example of that, because we've had General Scobie, but he wasn't a baddie. He was, he himself wasn't a baddie. His facsimile was. So I don't know. Maybe this is the second iteration. But you're right. We haven't yet sort of got that trope yet of, if you see a general in the Pertwee era, he's probably a bit dodgy, and so that certainly helps. But I just want to sidestep there because you brought in that scene, which highlights something I wanted to talk about, which is the character of the Doctor, particularly in the first half of this. I think that Pertwee's performance in that is really, really good, because in that meeting, you're right, we're meant to say, oh, this is an authority figure, it's a minister or a senior civil servant or something, and a general and the brigadier, and we're being reassured, and we're meant to go, oh, okay, that's fair enough. And Pertwee's doing that wonderful acting where he's making sure that the dodgy people think he's going along with the story, but the audience knows that he thinks there's a bit, he smells a rat. And the way that he just can sort of do, obviously the left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing. And then when they leave, he's like, no, this is a load of crap. Yeah. I think it's really, really good. So you see a lot of very good in control Doctor stuff there, very doctorish sort of stuff. You also see the wonderful Pertwee arrogance. And I love the way that in part one, he's just a complete arse to Professor Cornish. In a sort of just a really, wonderful and hilarious way to watch. And then when the Brigadier's like, he is in control here, and oh, my dear fellow, I want to help you. And, I love all of that. But interestingly here, the Doctor's arrogance does come with a price twice. And I wanted to highlight this because on the first occasion, when he insists on seeing the astronauts, when Carrington said, oh, we've got the astronauts, they're under examination, they're under quarantine, and good, show them to me. And that's what actually leads to them having to be moved and a whole bunch of people being killed. So, their deaths are a direct responsibility of the Doctor trying to foil their scheme. And then later on, when he's coming back in the capsule in episode 6, and he says, I'm not going to say anything until I see you in person. If he just said, their ambassador, something dodgy's going on, do the following, it would have been a lot easier. So I enjoy the Doctor's arrogance. I enjoy the way that he's in control, moves the plot along, and it gets you where you need to go. And he's the one that works out that it's a message, and he's the one that works out a whole lot of other stuff.
Yeah.
But his arrogance does also cause problems as well.
It does.
What's what they used to call a character, Rob?
You mentioned people getting killed, and I made a note that the violence really is on show in this story. I mean, you've got guys getting shot, you've got guys getting irradiated in the back of a truck and just dumped in a quarry. You can't think of anything remotely like this happening in the show today. They just wouldn't show that sort of thing. And yet, I think this kind of realism would appeal to a modern audience.
Yeah, it's very, very effective. I mean, you're right. A lot of people do get shot, but it is very like playground shooting. There's not even a bullet hole in the jumper, let alone blood. So it is sort of very play-fight. No, I get that, but that's what it's got to be. But it is very well done. You're right. I think probably the most horrific moment, and one that really got me as a kid, was the isotope being left in Lennox's cell.
Oh, yeah.
And that's so effective because Cyril Sharps plays abject fear just so effectively, which is really good. And I do love the fan theory that's Benton that does that, by the way.
I find it really chilling. Again, though, there's this cavalier attitude to radiation, which is all through the story. There's radiation everywhere. No one seems to particularly care unless it has to be a plot point. I mean, the guy just brought this isotope in covered with a cloche. It doesn't seem a very effective shield against radiation, Dave.
No.
Unless it was a very special cloche. I don't know.
No, that is true. And something else worth noting about the action scenes is, look, watching this one episode a week when it was first going out, you would never have noticed that it's the same person several times. But we are, Doctor Who fans who watch DVD documentaries and watch these shows many times. So we know who Derek Ware is. And we know who Terry Walsh is. So when Derek Ware gets shot in episode 1, and then again in episode 1, and then in episode 3, and then in episode 5, and then when Terry Walsh gets killed in episode 4, and in episode 7. You know, as fans, we sort of go, okay, we know that this is the same group of stuntmen doing the same stunt. And again, that's just a product of this being watched many times in one sitting, and you would never have recognised them back in the day.
No, not at all. We mentioned the budget for this. I want to jump back to pretty much episode 2. I think Recovery 7 looks really impressive. In fact, the first scene often fools me when I watch this into thinking it's a model shot, when you see it on the back of the truck from a distance.
Yeah.
And then you see people moving, and you think, oh no, this is actually real, because then the camera zooms in and you see that it's real, and they've got this actual big prop of a thing on the back of a truck. And then, of course, you have the helicopter appear and the guys hijack the truck, and that's quite an impressive set piece. You know, it may be a bit hammy here and there, but for kids' TV in the 70s, it was really something. But yeah, that Recovery 7 prop and the truck and such, just, yeah, you can see the money on the screen here.
Yeah, it's really, really effective, and they're also very, very good at making sure that the models correctly match the prop, the in-studio prop, which is something that doesn't happen a lot in that part of document. It's really, really effective there, but it does look good. I will say that is probably one of, for me, the two big plot holes in it, in that Carrington and his men have enough time to escape from Bessie, get back to the Space Center, clear everybody out, take the astronauts out, put in the tape recorder, and get out before the Doctor gets back. The timeline there is probably a little bit of a cheat, but I must admit, I always sort of remember it as being that they didn't have time to do it, but they do have that line about, oh, they cleared us all out, so they did actually have time to do it. And it, of course, does lead to that brilliant cut it open cliffhanger, which is just absolutely marvellous.
Right, cut it open.
Yeah, and I think that's probably a good place to talk about Michael Ferguson, the director, who's directed 3 Doctor Who stories, maybe 4. He did The War Machines as well. I think 4. He definitely did Seeds of Death. He definitely did The Claws of Axos. I think he did The War Machines. Mm-hmm. But he is a really, really good director. And by pure coincidence, a couple of weeks ago at the time of recording this, I was listening to the Second Great and Bountiful Human Empire podcast, or as we know them, the guys from Flight Through Entirety, talking about The Seeds of Death, which he directed. And they make the point there that he's one of those directors who can take an ordinary script and make it really energetic and really exciting. And that cliffhanger at the end of part 2 is a really good example. I mean, on paper, it's the Doctor says a couple of lines, a couple of questions, right, cut it open. But you have cut to the Doctor, cut to the brig, cut to the shore, cut back to the Doctor. And all of those cuts, he's zooming in as well. So it's cut, zoom in, cut, zoom in, right, cut it open, bang! And it just builds tension really well. And I just think it's another example of a director who I believe was quite early in his career at this stage going, how can I make a mark? How can I do something really different and energetic with this? And the shots of the spacesuits against the sun just walking towards you, a silhouette's really, really chilling. I think he does a really good job with that. And obviously, he can direct action.
Yeah, that lens flare as the alien walks into the base just feels very iconic to me. And there's some nice music that plays when that's happening. And when I think of this era, I think of that. Absolutely. Speaking of that scene, though, using the aliens via the remotes is an interesting idea. But they seem to make a bloody quick leap from being able to say, stand up, move forward, turn around, to them doing very complex stuff like walk into the base, kill this specific person, open this safe, do this. I'm not sure how they're doing that when they could barely get them just to walk forward and turn around earlier.
Yes, no, there is a lovely little piece in the article about this on the Cawdor City website where it says that, you know, it's a one control device that's able to give instructions like, as you say, walk in, open the door, open the safe, destroy the safe, kill James Quinlan, flew menacingly over the Doctor and pause for the cliffhanger. You know, it is very, very detailed, yes.
Yeah. Liz driving Bessie, I think, is a cool scene too, Dave, when I think of iconic scenes. And in fact, Liz, well, at least one of the Havoc boys pretending to be Liz, almost drifts Bessie around a corner. And I think, geez, even the Pert doesn't drive Bessie this hard.
Yeah, well, as I think every fan knows, Caroline John didn't have her driving licence at the time, and she didn't want to be sacked. She said, yeah, I can drive, sure. And does get to do it. And I think this is a very good story for Liz. It's not her best story because she's sort of captured and locked up during it, which is unfortunate. Yeah. But she does get to drive Bessie. She does get to go and handle stuff on her own. The Doctor is, by this stage, very relaxed at I can't go and do this thing the Brigadier wants, but Liz, you go and do it yourself because you're more than capable. She's the one who is able to run test programs on the computer. She's able to talk to the Doctor at his level. She gets to be scared by the aliens because they are genuinely scary. She is brave when faced by Regan and his thugs, and that moment where she's thrown to the thug's arm and he grabs her. Don't worry, I won't hurt you. Just that really wonderful sort of just confidence about her. I just think, look, everybody knows she's one of my favourite companions, and shown off to really great effect here, and looks good doing it.
Yeah, you like the hat?
The hat, the boots, it looks good. And look, maybe female listeners will tell us we're wrong here, but I think it looks good without looking, I don't know what the word is, like a sex object. Okay,
I thought you were going to say like looking like stereotypical 70s, but I was going to say, but it was the 70s. This is what they dressed like.
Yeah, but like I mean, we all know that Perry is dressed to be ogled, and Louise Jameson was dressed to be ogled. I think Caroline John is, of course, dressed as a Doctor Who girl, to use that expression, to look good, and she absolutely does. But I didn't sort of feel like, oh my God, why is she wearing that to the Space Centre? I think she's wearing something very stylish, but, something that you could wear to work, in the same way that she gets to wear, caving gear when she goes caving, and that, Pertwee stood up for her when the producer said, no. She's like, of course I'm going to wear this. And Pertwee was like, of course you'd wear that. So, yeah, I think it works really well. And her dynamic with Pertwee, I think, is also really good.
I made a note on the rocket sequence when Pertwee blasts off. I always get wrong-footed. This is in episode 5, Dave. I always get wrong-footed that the brig runs in and says, like, stop the rocket! And then it launches and the guy says, too late! I always think the credits are going to come in there. I always think that's going to be the cliffhanger. But there's so much more after that. It's like a false cliffhanger almost.
Yeah, it is. It is really effective. Episode 5 is quite a good one. And you do get that real sense of the Doctor really is going up in space. This is a proper rocket. There are things that are going wrong. It feels like it's being done for real. And then, yes, you do get that wonderful moment as the Doctor's coming towards the capsule. I think you do get some very good Doctor stuff that Pertwee does really well, like the, Doctor, do you have visual confirmation? If you mean, can I see it? Yes. I like the way the Doctor's sort of puncturing that real sort of pompous sort of official talk. But then, just when you think you know what's going to happen and the Doctor's going to find the astronauts and what's going on, oh my God, there's a giant spaceship, cut to credits.
Yes.
Completely wrong foots me.
Yeah.
Even if that is by far the weakest effect, I think, in the story. The circular cardboard flying saucer that, in black and white it was bad, in colour it's terrible.
Yeah, I mean, the collision with the spaceship never fully lands. We know the Doctor isn't going to be blown up because he's the Doctor. What's way more interesting to me, though, is when he comes across the Earth astronauts, thinking they're still on Earth, in the scenes after that, in episode 6. I've always thought that's a really cool scene, that they're alive and they're somehow brainwashed into just thinking they're in a waiting room.
Yeah, it's actually a really good way of wrong-footing the audience, and it comes to set up another bit of wrong-footing, which, again, we know that these guys are ambassadors, but watching it the first time, surely that revelation that these aliens are ambassadors and there's something else going on, and it turns out that the alien space captain is like a good and reasonable guy, is just a moment. And Pertwee sells it really, really well, because even the Doctor is shocked at the idea that they're ambassadors, and it absolutely gets sold.
But in that same episode, one of the aliens does show its face to Liz. And it's a really strange moment, because it looks really interesting and macabre, but the camera work is all over the shop, I presume deliberately. And then it's never a thing again. So we sort of go for this cheap shock, and it doesn't fully shock because we don't really get a great look unless you hit pause on the DVD. And we never get a look at them again, really? I don't know why that's there.
Yeah, I think it's just enough to go, wow, they really are alien. I think it's sort of a shot that you had to have, and if you hadn't had it, would all be saying, why didn't we get to see the alien at some point? But yes, clearly they've decided that it is too horrific to have a proper, just front on, okay, everybody, take a good long look at this. And then even afterwards, when you sort of see them inside, it's through the glass, and the reflection's a bit blurry, so you can't see it. I think that's got to be a choice to not be too horrific in kids' TV. There is a line somewhere. They're drawing it there.
Similar to Lennox being delivered the isotope, the Doctor getting gassed in the decontamination unit when he comes back is very frightening because, again, just like Lennox thought, well, I'm safe here. I'm in a cell. Please lock the door. You would think I'm deep inside the base here. I'm talking to people on the radio. You would think you were very safe, and yet you're not. Unit's bloody hopeless at security, Dave, because he gets gassed. I find that really scary.
It's a really interesting moment, and it highlights the character of Regan, who's a very, very interesting baddie. Perhaps the character that's most affected by the multiple writers on this, because although there is a constant character there and the actor's portrayal definitely holds it all together, Regan does lurch a little bit from being hide heavy through to, almost like an MI6 agent in terms of his motivations and his competence. But the actor does hold it together. But I think what makes this really work is that this is a conspiracy from in the heart of the British establishment and the military. So you get that moment. It's a subtle one where Carrington says, you're going to do all this, maps, passes, everything are in the envelope. And you realise that the reason this guy can come and go from a top secret establishment is that he's got a general doing it all for him. So he's got the passes, he does know where to go, he does know what to do. And it is that thing when you realise, the phone call's coming from inside the house. And if somebody on the inside, that senior, is working against you, it's actually really, really hard to stop them. It's the old, if the CEO of a company wants to commit fraud against the company, it's really hard to stop them.
All of that said, though, when he's sabotaging the fuel, for example, sure, Carrington's passes and whatnot have got him onto the base, but he seems to know very well what to do. Like, I'll run up these steps and I turn this knob, then I jump over this pipe, and then I crawl down here, and then I turn this knob. He seems to know a hell of a lot about how these complex systems work for someone who is, we assume, just meant to be a heavy.
Yeah, and I don't know whether it makes him more terrifying because he's more competent, or it makes him a little bit less believable because he's so competent, or, whether we're meant to imply that there is something more to him. Is he just a heavy, or is he somebody that Carrington has brought on in the way that Carrington had army soldiers working with him in part one? I mean, he's the sergeant that the Doctor catches out. So maybe Regan was doing something all along, or there is the Cawdor City theory that maybe he is an MI6 agent who's just there to help move the conspiracy along and make sure that Carrington's the fall guy. Who knows?
Yeah. Does the final episode hang together for you? I mean, it's got the Doctor building the Morse code device. That's a good, simple sort of thing to be doing. They use the ambassadors to retake the Space Center, sort of subverting the way they've been used up until now in the story. You've got that global broadcast that's going to happen. That's a pretty nuts idea. It all sort of comes to a big ending. Does the ending work for you, Dave?
Well, I agree with what you've just said. The build-up is fantastic. It's good to see the Pertwee Doctor pretending to make the device, but he's actually secretly making a radio in the meantime, and then he makes the device itself. That's really good Pertwee Doctor. You get the rescue of the Doctor and Liz by the Brigadier. You get the revelation of what's going on. Carrington then again takes over the Space Center. He's able to arrest the Brigadier, which, like, oh my god, he's going to arrest the Brigadier. You get that wonderful exchange as Carrington just gets more and more agitated, and the Brigadier's, I think the General's a bit overwrought. I think he's insane. Just really, really cleverly done, and there is a big build-up. I always thought that the ending worked, but watching it this time, I did notice that the actual big ending is really just the Doctor and the Brigadier walking in and going, it's all over, old chap. I guess it is. Bye.
Yeah.
And I guess this is the problem with what Mac Hulk, I think, is trying to do particularly. I mean, it's probably David Whittaker to some extent as well, but I think it's very much Mac Hulk's draft, is this idea that just because they're aliens doesn't mean they're evil, doesn't mean they're invaders, and they are in fact the good guys. So when you've turned your alien monster, so to speak, into the good guys, you can't have a big shootout or a big action scene to get rid of the baddies. And because we want to make the point that Carrington, and we'll come back to this in a moment, Carrington is wrong and flawed but not evil. He can't really be sort of taken out to be an action scene either. So you have sort of, by virtue of what you're trying to say, you have caught yourself in a bit of a cul-de-sac. I think there's enough action that it does sell me, but watching it this time I did sort of think, it's perhaps just missing one little denouement, one little sort of action beat to finish it, to really sort of knock off that crescendo.
Well, Carrington is so dedicated. And as he'll say to the Doctor at the end, I'm just doing my moral duty. And the Doctor's like, yeah, I know you are. It's a very downbeat sort of ending. But then what happens I find quite funny, because the Doctor quickly wraps things up, leaves Liz to deal with it all, does the handshake gag with the ambassadors, like, ooh, better not do that. And then the Pert just walks off. And it's always seemed to me like it's just Jon walking off the set. Like, he's done. There he goes.
Yeah, I love that. That's so Third Doctor. Just look, I'm done here. Bye. I'm not sticking around. And I have heard the comment that it does make more sense if you put this story after Inferno, and Liz leaves to go and work on this project, which I think is quite a good idea. But I like Carrington's character and I like his motivation, and it's very similar, I think, to the ending of the Silurians, where you have the moment where the Brigadier goes behind the Doctor's back at the government's orders to blow the Silurians up. And the Doctor is morally outraged. And as viewers who side with the Doctor, we are also morally outraged. But we also deep down know that the government was probably right to blow up the Silurians, who have tried to wipe out humanity twice in the last 2 hours. Yeah. And the idea that the government couldn't take the risk. And Liz gets to be that halfway character between the Doctor and the Brigadier, who sees both sides and sympathises with the Doctor, and I think knows the Doctor's right, but again in her heart knows that the Brigadier was right too. And in this one, Carrington is absolutely shown to be wrong, and his paranoia and his xenophobia risked plunging the Earth into a galactic war or an interplanetary war that it could not win. He's absolutely wrong. But if you genuinely believe that Earth is about to be invaded by aliens who are out to get us, doing everything in your power to prevent that happening is a very justifiable and understandable thing to do.
That's his moral duty.
It is a moral duty, and he's absolutely wrong, and he's blinkered, and he should have asked more questions, and he should have been more open-minded. And that's what the Doctor's there to teach us, and that's what this story teaches us. To be more open-minded, to question and to investigate, and to not just assume that the unlike is evil. Very important. Yeah. But I understand, he saw his astronaut buddy. This is like Neil Armstrong seeing Buzz Aldrin killed and going, well, these are the baddies. So I get it. And the dignity that the Doctor allows Carrington in the end, he allows him to put on the hat, pick up the swagger stick, and sort of, he's not dragged out, he's just escorted out. And as a side note, the fact that the military police there are wearing red caps is just a level of detail that you would never see with the military in Doctor Who today.
Yeah, agreed. I'll just say, based on what you're talking about there, this is Doctor Who doing some messaging, but it's not ripped from the headlines, and it's not messaging with a sledgehammer, but it's messaging, and it's important messaging.
Yeah, and as a kid, I would have been just off 6 when I saw this the first time, and similar sort of age when I saw it the second, third, fourth, etc. time, and I absolutely got what the message of this was. I didn't get it in quite the nuanced and detailed ways that I was able to articulate a moment ago, but I absolutely understood just the feeling of what that message was, and it works really, really well. We mentioned Carrington, we mentioned the Doctor and Liz, we haven't mentioned the Brig. And I just want to say here, this is early Brig, and this is where we see the Brig being utterly, utterly competent, even when he's failing because he's being beaten by somebody who's on the inside, and that's something he struggles to deal with. But I like that they give him that scene where Cornish says, you're doing a pretty terrible job, and the Brigadier says, well, these are the following things I've done. And you go, he's actually doing his best. He's actually quite capable of what he's doing. And then when he can put the pieces together, he is able to escape, get away, rescue the Doctor, and then take back the research station or the space centre. So I think, although, the Brig has to fail a bit, otherwise we don't have a story, he's shown to be incredibly capable.
Yeah, there's a more serious vibe to Season 7, and it's reflected in the Brig. Whereas when things get a bit more lighter and funnier with the unit family, the Brig becomes a bit more of a figure of... maybe not a figure of fun, but certainly he's not like this.
No, that's very true. I do want us to say, while we're talking about the military, it's very obvious all the stuntmen and extras know exactly how to hold a rifle properly, and none of the actors know how to hold a handgun properly. That was quite funny.
Yes. Lots of blinking when they fire too.
Yes, lots of that. I did mention that there, for my money, were two fairly obvious plot holes with this. We discussed the first. The second is, how did the aliens get the astronauts off Mars Probe 7 and the alien ambassadors onto Mars Probe 7 without their massive 5-mile wide spaceship being seen by the radar?
Yeah.
So that is a little cheap, but I mean, it took me till now to watch it. Can we talk about the music, Rob? You mentioned it a little bit earlier, but I think it needs its own little discussion. What did you think of it?
Oh, look, broadly I think it's good. I even pulled out the scene where the ambassador walks into the military base with the lens flare behind him. The music there is fantastic. And the little musical motif, when we see them in scenes, is very good too. But yeah, across the whole episode I think is good, except for that little bit that I said sounded like Blur off the Parklife album, doing an instrumental.
Yeah, I mean, this is Dudley Simpson before he becomes a regular. And I think before he's doing basically every story in the Hinchcliffe years or the Williams years. So there is, and there is less money by then as well. So he's doing more of a house sound and more of a set sort of thing. Here he's got the space and the time and the money to play around. It builds, I think, on the themes we heard in The Invasion with Unit.
Yes.
So you've got that sort of that jazzy thing, that very early 70s sort of vibe. But you've also got that sort of tense saxophone music as people are going around. I think it's just a really different score for Doctor Who, and it stands out, and that's really cool.
All right, let's sum it up, Dave. I'll go first. How do you sum this up? I think there's a gritty, suspenseful vibe here that really sets it apart from a lot of the classic era. Maybe not season 7 itself, as I was talking about earlier, but classic Doctor Who more broadly. This is out on its own branch of the tree. Pertwee is great as the Doctor. He's confident, he's an action man, he's got great lines, he's totally in control, all these things we've talked about tonight. And the direction, I think, gives it a bit of a cinematic feel, maybe more than a bit of a cinematic feel, which isn't always the case in classic Doctor Who. That said, it's not always perfect. It's a 7-parter, and yeah, you feel it in places. I think this could have been a killer 5-parter, Dave. Let's not bury the lead either. For a story called The Ambassadors of Death, the aliens themselves don't get as much focus as you'd maybe expect from the title. Still, it's ambitious, as we said, it's memorable, and it's underrated, as we said. I'd be happy to give it a 7.5 out of 10 any day of the week. Yeah,
I understand all of that. I'm going to be even more effusive in my praise, because this is what I like in Doctor Who. Now, this isn't Dave from the Doctor Who show speaking on behalf of Doctor Who fans. This is Dave Kitchen speaking for Dave Kitchen. This is what I like in Doctor Who. There is a lot of very fun, silly camp Doctor Who that I absolutely enjoy, but when Doctor Who is taking itself seriously and the cast is taking itself seriously, the story is saying something but telling a good story with real characters, you have a really good cast, all of that to me just works so well. Put on top of that a couple of cool space ideas, alien ambassadors, a nice space sequence, and this is what I want from Doctor Who. This is my kind of Doctor Who. It's whiskey with no ice rather than a Prosecco, and that's fine. That's what I like. So, although this isn't the 10 out of 10 like the rest of Season 7, it's a 9, if not a 9.5. I think that it's got its faults. I think that, yes, the pacing isn't as even as it is for the Silurians and Inferno, so some episodes do hammer along with a lot in them. Some of them are a lot slower. That's fine. But having watched this over the last week, I could very happily watch it all over again and still appreciate it and probably pick out some different things that I saw this time.
You're Dave Kitchen, and you approve that message.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, that was our chat on The Ambassadors of Death. What did you guys out there think of it? We've already had one listener write in and tell us what he thinks about it. Dave, do you want to maybe kick us off with Neela's via email talking about Ambassadors of Death?
Yes, Rob. This comes in from Neela's, one of our regulars, and he says via email, The Ambassadors of Death, a truly underrated story and one that's often lost in the mix because of the other stories either side of it, but it should get its flowers. It's a totally different concept as opposed to the usual alien invasion and gives a completely different take, focusing not just on the alien aspect, but the flaws within the main characters such as Carrington. It's a fun story. Granted, it is definitely 1 or 2 episodes too long, given all the padding and the chasing about. I love the scene in the cell with the doctor shouting at the soldier to stand at attention and call him sir. Great stuff. Also has some cool music and sounds in it too. I will say this, but Liz Shaw is such a good companion. She is often forgotten about, but she is really good. I've always liked her. She does represent a strong female companion, and I love that she takes no shit and even drives Bessie. That brings me on to the Doctor. Pertwee nails it from the get-go in this series, and is truly in command in this story. The best Doctor, I know it's subjective, who completely owns every scene he is in. He has a presence and you believe in him. That brings me on to the current series of Doctor Who. I just can't buy into the 15th Doctor because he's always crying, doesn't have the presence or gravitas the Doctor should have, and I hate that he changes costumes every week. Pick a style and stick with it, with varying colours each week like Pertwee, Baker, Tennant, Smith, Whittaker, etc. And I hate the Scooby-Doo style, let's go get changed, and the Britney Spears music plays and there's all dancing. Not for me. Neither is all the honey and babes. The complete opposite of Pertwee's gravitas. I just feel like I'm not watching the Doctor, but his character from Sex Education. Sorry, I don't mean to rant. But here, this series has, however, been an improvement on the previous series, not that it was a high barometer. But anyway, I shall continue to watch, as just like your football team, you never turn your back even when it's not going well. Cheers, guys. Neilers from Carrickfergus in Northern Ireland. That's a really good summary there, Neilers. Thank you for writing that in. I agree that this series has been better than the last. As to the overall stuff and where we're going with the Doctor, I will save that for our cold take. More to come.
Yeah, more to come. We've got an email here from Dave. And it's not you, Dave. It's another Dave.
There are a lot of us out there.
There are indeed. He says, "Hi, Rob and Dave. Just listened to your latest podcast and really enjoyed it as usual. It's good to hear your rational discussions regarding the series, which is in contrast to the unhinged crap that often appears in the comments of YouTube videos that I sometimes watch. Anyway, I'd like to nominate Mind Warp for the next deep dive. I remember seeing it when first shown on the ABC, presumably 87, and it's one of those stories that's always interested me for some reason. Keep up the good work. Regards, Dave." And Dave, I'm sorry, but Mind Warp didn't win the vote. It was out there for everyone to vote on, and they just didn't want it, mate. I would have been happy to do it, though. I would have been happy. And would have gave me a win for a change in these votes.
But that's fine. We will get to Mind Warp when we do trial, and it will be this year. So hang in there, Dave.
That's it.
An email from Adrian Stark, another regular. "Hi, Rob and Dave. I hope you had a nice Easter and are enjoying having a new series of episodes to watch and review. I would like to discuss urban myths in Doctor Who. The most well-known example is the long-held view that the very first episode, An Unearthly Child, was repeated the following week straight before the next episode because a lot of people didn't watch it due to the assassination of John F. Kennedy the previous day. I understand that this view has subsequently been debunked, and it is now accepted instead that the repeat was due to power blackouts throughout large parts of the UK during the transmission of An Unearthly Child. Clearly, it's not great to have a large part of the potential audience missing the launch episode of a new show, which introduces the key elements and characters. However, a lot of sources still continue to state that the repeat was due to JFK's assassination. While watching the Season 22 Collection Blu-ray box set recently, I've come across another example of a Doctor Who urban myth. In both the audio commentary and the making of documentary for the Two Doctors, it is stated as fact a number of times that Robert Holmes was a vegetarian, and the theme of the story was him sharing his views about the killing of animals for food. I'm pretty sure that Colin Baker, Nicola Bryant and Eric Saywood state this at various times, and it seems to be pretty well accepted as part of fan lore. Tucked away on the second Two Doctors disc, there is a 1.5 hour audio interview between Robert Holmes and Richard Marsden, which was for a DWM interview. It was recorded between seasons 22 and 23, and less than a year before Robert Holmes passed away. I nearly fell off my chair when Robert Holmes clearly said during this interview that he is not a vegetarian while discussing the background to the Two Doctors. It makes me wonder what other facts have made their way into fan lore over the years are simply incorrect. Regards, Adrian Stark.
Yes. Now, on the back of this, I reached out to Paul Hayes, who I've interviewed a couple of times on the show relating to his Doctor Who reference books, to sort of get to the bottom of this, because the second of those reference books is actually about how the show started back in '63 and that whole era. And Paul wrote back and said he's happy for me to share his reply, so I'm going to read that now. He says, I'm very happy to give my view, although it is of course purely my personal opinion, but my opinion, for what it's worth, is one that is not so much debunked as in fact very much bunked. While I will admit that I haven't personally read the minutes of the BBC's Programme Review Board meeting of November 27th, 1963, other researchers have, and that's the source usually cited for the assassination being the reason the high-ups decided on a repeat. Whereas the power cut story doesn't appear to have a primary source at all. The main origin story for this appears to be the How Stammers Walker books of the 1990s. When Stephen James Walker kindly read the draft of Pull to Open for me, he asked why I hadn't mentioned the power cut issue, and I explained that I simply hadn't been able to find any first-hand evidence for it. Stephen told me that he definitely had a source for it in the 1990s and that he wouldn't have included it in their work without one. While there's no question that he's a serious and respected researcher, and I do believe him, unfortunately he wasn't able to recall or retrace what that source had been. I did research quite hard through various local and national newspapers from that week, looking for any mention of widespread or serious power cuts that weekend, which you'd think, if they had affected a significant number of people, would have been reported on. But I found nothing. Perhaps it could have been a smaller power cut which affected a major BBC transmitter, but the transmitters did have backup generators, and you would expect such a transmitter failure to be recorded in the BBC's Programme as Broadcast documents for the day. I have looked through complete Programme as Broadcast documents for November 23, 1963, and they contain no such mention of any failure. Similarly, the BBC Audience Research Department produced a report on that opening episode which contains no indication of any sizable chunk of their sample panel having been unable to view it because of any power failure. Other research reports I have seen do sometimes mention where there have been transmission or reception issues, so again, I would be surprised if a major failure weren't given at least a passing mention. There's also the BBC's estimated audience figure too, 4.5 million or 9% of the potential UK television audience. That isn't wildly out of whack with what other shows in the slot had been getting. For example, the first of the last Children's Department serial to be shown in the Saturday tea time slot, The Chem Lad Mystery, back in January 1963. It had got 10% or 5 million. Another thing is the complete lack, as far as I'm aware, of any anecdotal evidence. I may be alone here, but I don't recall ever having seen any comment from someone who went on to become a fan that they were unable to watch the original broadcast because of a power cut. So basically, while it's certainly possible that the power cut issue may be true and may have been a factor in the repeat, I wasn't comfortable enough to include it in Pull to Open. I hope that helps. From Paul.
Well, thank you to Adrian for taking the time to write in and raise a really interesting topic, which is where fan lore and myths just be taken as fact. And I think that what Paul's done there, and thank you for writing in as well, Paul, is just show that when you do go to primary sources, some of these things can be really fascinating and interesting to work on. I think one of my favourite myths that's just, I think always just sort of said, to sort of reassure Doctor Who fans, was this idea that the production of Warriors of the Deep was affected by a surprise snap election. Whereas if you actually go and look at the media at the time, the speculation that the Prime Minister was going to call an election at about that time was absolutely rampant, and it was not a surprise or a shock at all. It's just that the BBC had to make some decisions about what got sort of shoved around and what got prioritised, and Doctor Who wasn't it. And JNT didn't cope too well with the changes, but, you know, he made the excuse it's all the Prime Minister's fault. There's another really important one around Mind Warp, but I will save that for when we talk about Trial later this year. But yeah, that was fascinating. Thanks, guys.
I think so too. All right, Dave, we like to finish off with what we've been watching. I think I half mentioned that I was going to start a show called News Anchor last time we did one of these. It's a Japanese drama about a newsroom. That's been dropping on Netflix every Saturday, and I've been really enjoying it. It's typical J-drama stuff for people who know that sort of thing. I've caught Star Wars Tales of the Underworld, which is a 6-part animation of 15-minute episodes. Pretty much 3 of them tell one story and 3 of them tell another story. I've watched Andor, of course, which we'll do an alternate galaxies on in the very near future. I've been pondering a rewatch of the Larry Sanders Show, which I've never actually watched start to finish. I found a cheap DVD set on eBay of the whole thing, and I'm going to watch it because I've just been getting into the whole late night wars, Leno and Letterman back in the 90s, and, I think it was Letterman who once said that the Larry Sanders Show was basically like his real life. He couldn't believe it was a TV show. And finally, I'm also sort of half-assedly planning an afternoon show-inspired rewatch of stuff. I've gone out and bought a few DVDs here and there over the past year or so. Stuff like Banana Man, Inspector Gadget, Voltron, Astro Boy, Danger Mouse, Count Duckula, all that sort of stuff. Not sure how I'm going to structure this yet, because series like Voltron and Gadget are massively long on their own. Maybe I'll be swapping a lot of discs and watching an episode of this and an episode of that and pretending I'm watching the afternoon show. I don't know, but that's on the cards. We'll see what happens.
That'll be interesting, Rob. I have watched a few episodes of Banana Man, of course, starring the goodies, and Danger Mouse over the years, and I've sort of found them really, really entertaining. I don't know how I'd go on a sort of a big, long, full watch. Duckula, I must admit, I haven't seen since I was a kid. I'm not sure how that'll stand up. I did buy the box set of Inspector Gadget probably 20 years ago, and after about 4 episodes realised, as much as I loved that as a kid, it is so formulaic as to be really hard to watch. On the other hand, I did a rewatch of Astro Boy, I think, was it this year or last year? Maybe a year ago. This is the 1980 Astro Boy, of course, I assume you're talking about.
Yes.
Yes, and I was able to do a rewatch of that very, very easily. That worked out really, really well. And there were some episodes there that, again, how did we watch that as a kid?
Yeah. Anime tends to date really well because the Japanese do really good stories.
Yeah, absolutely. Voltron, I would be fascinated to watch. You're going to watch Machine Voltron or Lion's Voltron?
Lion.
I'll be fascinated to hear how that goes because I have very fond memories of it. And I think that the opening, how we reformed Voltron story is really good. I have a feeling after that's going to get very formulaic.
We'll see.
We'll see. Well, you will anyway.
Yes.
I have watched season 1 of The Tomorrow People, and I will come back and watch subsequent seasons, but I must admit, I found it a fascinating watch, and it was really interesting to see what they were doing and how they were doing it, and, spot the Doctor Who actor and all the rest of it. But it's not very good, and I wasn't going to dive straight into season 2, but I absolutely will. And I do plan to finish all the Tomorrow People sort of over the course of the year, so I'll get back to that. Just for a bit of sort of light entertainment, I did watch a whole bunch of Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister episodes, and thoroughly enjoyed them. I think that they just have not dated at all. They're really, really good, and like you, I've been watching Andor. I'll save my thoughts on that for our Andor season 2. Alternate Galaxies, which we'll be doing sometime in early to mid-June. But off the back of that, I decided to go and watch Firefly for the first time in a few years. So I'm a couple of episodes into that.
Nice. What a great series.
It is a great series, although I was reminded why the last time I did it, I started with episode 2 rather than the pilot. And having watched the pilot this time, I remembered why I started with episode 2. This is very clearly back in the days when pilots were very rough and ready and not quite the full season, and it shows here. It just does not have the pace or the spark or the vibe of the rest of Firefly. It's quite a tough watch, actually, I found.
Speaking of Firefly, there were a lot of comic books put out in its wake, filling in things like the Tale of Shepherd book and things like that. But in more recent times, there's been a series of novels, big, large format hardback novels. There's about 9 of them. I can see them from where I'm sitting. I've read about 3 of them so far, but I've been collecting them as they come out. They are very good.
Oh, okay.
I highly recommend those. They're really fun reads, and they feel exactly like watching TV episodes.
Okay, great.
All right. Next time, Dave, well, we've got a few things coming up. We've got one more hot take next weekend. We've talked a bit about this because it's going to drop at 4 a.m. Australian time. We won't be getting up and watching it that early, so we'll get up on a Sunday morning, watch it like in the good old days when we would watch Doctor Who on Sunday mornings and record a hot take sometime that day. Also coming in June, we've got our Season 2 Andor Alternate Galaxies, which we've just been talking about. And then at the end of June, we'll look at Season 2 of Doctor Who as a cold take. And they're always very popular episodes amongst the listeners out there, Dave.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've done our hot takes. Some of them have been very, very hot and very... Look, we've just gone and said what we feel about the episode, and I know a number of them having gone back and had other views and reflected upon them, my views have changed or evolved. There's a couple we've said particularly we want to watch again before we go in and do a really sort of informed take. We want to take feedback from the listeners and weave all that in as well. So yeah, we will be dedicating our June episode to looking back at this series as a whole and what we all thought as one big piece. Yep, Series 2 of Andor will be doing Alternate Galaxies. I'm hoping about the time that this episode drops, we'll be gathering here at Camp David to do a Jin and TARDIS on the Ribos operation. So they'll be coming out. There'll also be a list makers. Between now and then, Rob, I'm going to be spending 10 days in a part of the world where the Australian government's travel advice is officially reconsider your desire to travel. And parts of it have been actually ruled as do not travel, but I'm going there as a guest of the country in question and paid for by their embassy, so I hope they'll look after me, and I'll get back safely to talk about this all in June. But yeah, hot takes, Andor, list makers, Jin. What more do you want from us over the next month?
I think we're putting something out on every Sunday of the month, and you're having that 10-day break, so yeah, we are overachievers, I think.
And we've both got birthdays.
We do. Yeah, me at the very tail end of May, and yourself, early June?
Early June. So yeah, a lot coming up, but look, thank you for listening. There's been a lot of content from us this month, even more coming out next month. We appreciate you checking in, but until then, what's there to say other than I've been Dave?
And I've been Rob.
We'll speak again many times over the next month.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
You've been listening to
The Doctor Who Show with Rob and Dave.
Find us online by searching for
The Doctor Who Show.
We also love it when you write in. Drop us a line anytime at hello@thedwshow.net.
It's all over, old chap. I guess it is. Bye.